We're learning the Mammor Rei Reach Beni, which is the question about why does Yitzchak want to bless Esav. So the Mammor goes like this: Rei Reach Beni Kireach Sadash Baruch Hashem. That I smell the smell of my son. He's talking. He thinks to Esav, like the field of Hashem, which the Rashi says is the Garden of Eden. Asher Baruch Hashem, that God blesses. So the Alter Rebbe asks the obvious question. The Yitzchak haven to Esav. Yitzchak thinks he's talking to Esav. How could Esav be so important, so special to Yitzchak? I mean, he had to have some idea about Esav's personality or behavior, not just his personality, but his behavior. Gam ve'emes any moving. How did really Yitzchak view Esav? Because we see like this, we see seemingly it's not like he was totally oblivious to Esav's behavior, because sometimes he says kitzayid befiv, that it says about Esav that he had like a tzayid, he was like kind of hunting with his mouth. He was using his mouth to fool Yitzchak. He would try to fool him with questions as if he cared about the specific of the law. Like he would ask, that even though straw is not something that one has to tithe, he would ask Yitzchak, how does one tithe from straw? So he would think that he's very careful in the mitzvos. In other questions, he would ask, and some then we find that the pasuk says, "Akol kol Yaakov," that when he talks to Yitzchak, when Yaakov is talking to Yitzchak, giving Yitzchak, trying to give Yitzchak the illusion that it's Esav, Yitzchak doesn't buy it. He gets suspicious. Why? He says it sounds like Yaakov is talking. And why? What does Rashi say? Because Yaakov used terminology and a way of talking that Esav wouldn't talk. It's not just the voice, but it's the wording. He says, because Yitzchak asked him, how'd you get back so fast from the hunting or from the shechita, and that to go find an animal for this feast? He says, God made things happen for me fast. And V'yada she'esav ein shem shemaim shagar b'fiv. And it says that Yitzchak knew that Esav didn't talk that way. He didn't say because God made it fast for me. So in one time, the Torah tells us that he kind of fooled Yitzchak. The other time, we see that he wasn't fooled. He didn't believe really in Esav's character being a frum Jew. Like he didn't talk like that. I mean, obviously, also he married women that his parents weren't happy with. I mean, you can't say Yitzchak was totally oblivious to Esav's behavior.
At the end of the last Parsha, it says that he married Yehudit Be'eri. And Yehudit, isn't that a Jewish name? And Be'eri, that's the kibbutz that, they killed a woman, Yehudit in Be'eri, actually.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people actually talking about that, yeah. I mean,
wasn't Yehudit a Jewish name? And yet it says that he married a daughter of Yishmael?
He married Basmas. Basmas was the daughter of Yishmael, and Yehudit was, or Yudit, I forget how to pronounce her name. She was from the Chiti woman. He went at the end of Parsha to marry a third wife.
So the Hittites and the Jews had the same names, Yehudit?
Yeah. I mean, Yehudit later became and Yehudit became names because of the word Yehuda, which is the name that Leah gave Yehuda. But why was she called Yehudit? I don't know. I don't know what the reasoning was. But either way, however it was, her behavior wasn't according to the liking of either of the parents. It doesn't say that just Rivka was upset. It says Yitzchak and Rivka was upset. So much so that, according to one opinion, they caused Yitzchak to go blind. So he says, "Ulhavin inyan." So to understand, we have to understand what does this mean. The idea is like this: Yehine Esav. Well, who is Esav? Where does Esav come from? How does Esav come out of Yitzchak and Rivka? I mean, Rivka doesn't fall for Esav's tricks, but Yitzchak does. So it says Achine Esav. So Fisa de Dahava. It's the offshoot. It's the discharge, the bad alloys of the gold. The Hava is gold. Pseilis HaGvura, which means Gvura is red, is dam, blood, is passion. So that's gold, which is the color of yellow color versus a red metal. It's not white like silver. So pseilis the Gvura, it's the bad alloys of Gvura of Yitzchak, which is the mid of Yitzchak. We know that gold is more valuable than kesef. The highest level of yira, and Gvura is higher than Chesed. We know that even in Chesed, we have what's called Gvuras Kshamim, right? When does Chesed become powerful is with Gvura. Chesed alone could trickle, but we want to have powerful rain that comes from Gvura. So the power of the blessing is in Gvura. But with all that positive of Gvura, but there's bad parts. It's not 100% pure, right? Gold is not 100% pure. So the bad alloy, Yatsi Esav, that's Esav is the discharge of the gold. Nevertheless, there is parts of Esav, which is the head of Esav, stays in the lap of Yitzchak. You know the famous story that at the end Esav is killed in the Maras HaMachpelah by the grandchildren of Yaakov, and his head rolls into Yitzchak's cave, and he smiles. Well, Havin Yin Reisha, what does it mean that there's the head of Esav? So here we're going to learn an interesting concept. So he goes like this. We know what is the head of Esav? How is the head separate from the body? So it says like this. Yud Aleph Samimone Hektaris. There's 11 parts of the spices of the Ketoris that was made up of 11 components, 11 ingredients. Atzari, Vatziparin, V'chulu, the different ingredients. And why is there 11? So the reason is like this. Vehem kineged Yud Kisrin de Misavusa. This is the 10 crowns of impurity. Misavusa means tuma, impurity. Shuachais, what does it mean, the 10 crowns of impurity? Shuachais shbekdusha machayis ezelumasa. That is then he's going to explain in a second what that means. But that's the holy life force that gives life to impurity. Why? Just like in anything holy is made up of the 10 sfirot. There has to be, first of all, we have to remember a few points. Point number one is everything starts from Hashem. There's no existence. Impurity is not an existence on its own. It doesn't exist as an entity on its own. That there's godliness and there's impurity. Everything comes from Hashem. So if everything comes from Hashem, how is there impurity? So God has to give life to impurity. So just like he gives life to Kedusha, to holiness, Hashem has to give life to impurity, otherwise it wouldn't exist. Everything exists from Hashem. So he says, it's just like this in holiness. It's made up of the 10 spheros of Hashem. Klipa also, even the klipa, which is they call the peel, meaning the impurity, has to have a ray of the 10 spheres of holiness to give it life. But what do we find by Kedusha? What's the number of holiness? There's only 10. The number is 10, not 11, and not 9. Ubi klipa hu yudalef. But when it comes to klipa, there's 11 components of the samamone hakatoris. So if it gives life to impurity, so it has to have 11. He's going to explain why. Why is holiness? Everything comes from Hashem. So why does the holiness that comes into holy things remain the number 10? But the source of impurity, which also has to come initially from holiness, is 11. When something is manifest that is created from holiness, it says, for instance, what is the effect when something is created by holiness? It says, that all the cosmos of Hashem, the sun, the moon, they're constantly bowing to Hashem. Why? Why are they bowing? Why are they nullified to Hashem? Mechamas shemasigim, because they understand that their life force that's given to them comes from Hashem. So recognizing their creator, they acknowledge him and bow to him. Masha'enkin and klipas, when it comes to klipas tuma. Tuma doesn't recognize Hashem, doesn't recognize at least Hashem to be a functioning force within them, right? Yaakov, Paro says that God is a Lekai de Lekai, he's the life of the life, but I'm also God. They don't want to be bottled to Hashem. So they lift themselves up they fly high like an eagle in a way of chutzpah, not in a positive way, to say, I'm my own entity. So how does that work? If they would recognize their life, or if they would be conscious, either knowing or unknowing, but they would want to recognize their life force, so then it would make them be bottled. They would recognize Hashem. So they're taking from Hashem, but they're not recognizing him. It means that their life force gets lost within them. It's their foundation, but it's not functioning within them. It means it's not recognized. It's in Golus. That's the idea of Said Golus. That's the idea of exile. Even though they get life force from Hashem because everything has to come from Hashem. It doesn't affect in them that they should be nullified to Hashem because they get swallowed up. And they're able to remain as an entity of separation and even in a way of fighting Hashem. I'm trying to fight Hashem. They lift up as an eagle, saying, I'm something. And if I'm something, then that's not bittul to Hashem. So what about their life force? If everything has to come from Hashem, so how do they stay in existence? Why don't they expire if they fight their life force? Because it's nivla b'toichem. It gets lost in them. So there's the life force, it comes from Hashem. That's the galus hashchina. What does it mean, galus hashchina? That God is giving life to something that doesn't recognize Him. God is giving life to something that refuses to acknowledge Him. But the problem is that in the 10 levels of kedusha, their life force is revealed within them. They acknowledge Hashem, so it's effective within them. So that's the 10 spheres. That's godliness functioning within them. But if the life force of Hashem in the tumah, the impurities, gets swallowed up, so then then there should be a disconnect. If something's swallowed up, it's no longer connected to its source. So maybe it comes into existence, but how does it stay in existence? The Baal Shem Tov says God didn't just create the world; He has to keep on creating the world constantly. So if any second the connection, the line is not connected, it ceases to exist. So how does tumah, how does impurity, how does things that don't acknowledge Hashem stay in existence? How do they continue to live from holiness? If it gets lost and swallowed up, so there's a disconnect. It says that is the 11th component. That's the 11th spice, levoina. That's part of the 11. It's like Wi-Fi charging, right? There's no plug, but there's an outside source, a makiv, that gives them life anyways. So the life itself gets swallowed up. But how does the life stay connected? Through a way of makiv, which doesn't have to have a direct contact. It doesn't have to be plugged in. If it doesn't have to be plugged in, so it could take a life, it could draw life while it manipulates its source. It's not a contradiction. And that's the 11th component. That's why in Tumah there's 11 and Kedusha there's 10. Kedusha, you're always plugged in. But the Rebbe speaks about that in Kedusha there's also 11. But the 11th is not necessary to keep the 10 in existence. It's the makiv that's there anyways, but it's not the makiv that's required to keep it in existence. Over here, if it doesn't have the 11th component, that's why it has to be counted. If it doesn't have the 11th component, it can't exist. By Kedusha, the 11th component is not a necessity. It's not necessary for its existence because it exists clearly from the 10 components because it's always plugged into Kedusha. It's always recognizing its source. The 11th component is the ability to get out of your space, but it's not necessary for its existence. Therefore, it doesn't have to be counted as part of the 10 spheres. We're in Tumah, if you don't have the 11th component, it doesn't exist. So it's necessary to count it as part of the 11, part of the 10, because without the 11th, the 10 don't exist. It's only outside, it's surrounding them, encompassing them. It doesn't get swallowed up. So it keeps its connection to the or that's in them, but it itself is outside of them. Like I said, an example, not that I understand the science or the electricity part of it, but something like that, the difference between plugging something in or a Wi-Fi connection. Well, fishu or a makiv milmaila min hadashalem, and what does it mean makiv? That it stays outside of their das. What does das means? They're not applying that recognition. They're not recognizing that there's that their life force is connected to something higher. Not just that they have a life force from Hashem, but in order for that life force to keep them in existence, it has to have a source of life that it has to have something that keeps it going. And it's l'mal midashalem. They don't want to recognize that. They don't feel it. And their life force that they do feel, they don't see it as a connection to Hashem. It's swallowed up in the tumah. Therefore, they have the gaiva magbim masatzim. They lift themselves up in a chutzpah kind of way and say, "Li oiv ani esisani. I'm a self-made man. I'm a self-made person." And what is the 11th component? The 11th component is that stays. It's obviously the part that's kedusha, that's still holy, but it gives life to the unholiness, and that's galus hashchina. Because galus hashchina is that, so to say, God forces Himself to give life to horrible things, right? How could a person pick up their hand to chop off a baby, right? So that there's a life force in that. Why doesn't the life force stop? Because that's galus hashchina. Who reisha the Esav, and the 11th component is the head of Esav. I mean, Esav's whole body is disconnected, is nivla. But the 11th component is the head, and that's why the head goes back to Yitzchak, because that never got corrupt. The part that's outside, that stays connected to Yitzchak. Mamish b'kedusha and holiness, like the 11th component of the Keturos. So when Esav is talking from that level, when he asks a question, it's not his behavior. What do we find about Esav's question? They were abstract questions. He was asking an idea. How do I tithe the straw? How do I tithe salt? So from those abstract questions, that's how he asks questions. How does one tithe the straw? But the way he really is in his internal, but when he's talking about things that matter to him, he doesn't talk like a Jew. And therefore, right away, he says, Yitzchak hears, he knows his source, but he doesn't know, but he knows that that's not how he behaves. So when he's asking him questions, he hears the potential of Esav. But when he's actually functioning, he knows that Esav doesn't behave that way. He marries women that are inappropriate. So then the question obviously remains, so why does Yitzchak want to bless Esav? What does it mean that there's this life force that goes into the 10 crowns of unholiness, of impurity? That the chaya, the force, the energy gets swallowed in v'yakenu. You want to take it out. There's times when man gets overrun by another man, meaning to say the good over the bad, or the bad over the good, and it's when the good gets controlled by the bad. It's bad. It's negative. It's leraloi. It's bad things come out of it. So he says, where does it come from? Why is there this what is there's also not just that the Esav is giving, that there's life force of negative that is in existence, but it has to be a bottom line to it and a reason for it. And the reason for it is that in this holiness, there's certain sparks that fell, impurity, there's certain sparks that fell that went into the world of Tuma. And the only way to get it out is to get it out is to deal with the impurity. The Gam also it happened from the breaking of the vessels. And also, not just that breaking of the vessels is before Adam and Chava ate from the tree. That has nothing to do with Adam and Chava eating from the tree. There was a Shviras HaKelim before creation. There was a breaking of the vessels where pieces, sparks fell into impurity. But also we had a component, we contributed to it. That's the famous Mammor we learned on Parshas, that what would have happened had we not eaten from the tree? We would have been able to take out those sparks, not through engaging. But once we've eaten from the tree, then it becomes part of our problem, and we have to fix ourselves in order to fix the world. So once we ate from the tree of knowledge, as is mentioned in Kabbalah, and therefore the sparks go in there and give them life force, and that's the reason why they exist. And that's the idea of Golos, where godliness has to give life force to negative, and our job is to get it out. Why did we go into Golos in exile? To get the converts. What does it mean, the converts? It doesn't just mean the actual converts, but also means the sparks that got lost. That's the Mittel Rebbe says. The Mittel Rebbe says, when he says, I get it, that we had to make Gerim, we had to make converts, but there weren't enough converts, there weren't that many converts over time that justify a 2,000 year of Golos. So he says it's not just the converts, it's also the sparks. But he says in Esav itself, we find these sparks. Esav had great people come out of him, great Jews come out of him. In him himself, there were these sparks. Who? Reb Meir, the famous sage Reb Meir in the times of the Mishnah, the student of Rabbi Akiva. Unkelis, right? Unkelis, the Ger, who was from the royal family of Rome, who translated the Chumash into Aramaic. That's the side of the Chumash. Shmai and Naftalian, right? The great teachers of Hillel the elder. Avadia the prophet. He's going backwards up. His Remeir was the youngest. And Avadia the prophet was from Edom, right? We know that he prophesied about Edom. Umehem haya tzayid b'fiv, and these sparks gave that Esav should be talking sparks of holiness, and he's asking questions to Yitzchak. So what did Yitzchak want? Yitzchak wanted that he should be able to take out from Esav without Yaakov these sparks. He wanted to overwhelm Esav to take out the sparks of holiness from Esav. Also today, strength could be swallowed up and taken out. But how does that happen? Yaakov is the 7 midos of the world, right? And through engaging, right? What's required from the 7 midos? The 7 midos these are the 7 midos of creation, the world. It's the 7 days of the world of creation. So Zer up in the small complexion is you have to go into the world within the creation and pull out those sparks. That all the strength, all the tools are within the levels of Zah, of the 7 days of creation, the 7 midos of Hashem. And it comes in the world of formation of the days of the week. Like it says about Eliezer, he's the servant of the house. What does it mean, the servant of the house? The one who gets things done. So Yaakov gets things done, and getting things done means to pull the sparks out throughout engaging in the world throughout the days of the week. Days of the week means days of chol, days that are not holy. Yitzchak says, listen, why do we have to go that way? I have another strategy of fixing the world, all right? Doesn't have to come and you have to go down, send a fixer, someone who's going to come out and engage and get dirty and come back, with oily hands because you have to go underneath the sink. Maybe I will overwhelm light into Esav, overpower, I'll give him these great blessings, and that will change Esav on its own. And therefore the sparks will come up. When he entices Ribi'ar, if he adds tremendous light, that's why the blessings are so powerful. In order to get bad out through good, you have to give a lot of light. To be able to gather out all the sparks, you have to come with a deep light, a powerful light, to pull out all the sparks, like a strong magnet to pull out all the pieces. If you have a light magnet, it's not going to pull it out. So he figured he's going to give these tremendous blessings to Esav, knowing that Esav in practice isn't a good person, but he has so much good within him in potential. And instead of going through years of galus, of interactions, of ups and downs, wins and losses, through Yaakov, let's just overwhelm Esav with blessings and we'll fix it that way. Vizel, and that's what he says to Yitzchak. He says to Esav, thinking he's talking to Esav, God should give you from tal. What's the dew? He says, top of page 18, it is the same. It's the tal that comes from atik, which is the tainug, the pleasure of the crown, right? Which is the highest level of godliness within creation. Is the keser, the higher level of keser. It comes down into Zer Ampin. So instead of going to Zer Ampin, it goes straight into Yesav. What is the Shmani Haaretz? The Shemin of Chachma. So he figured through these midos, higher levels of revelation. The Abba Yosef Barata, and father, which is Chachma, creates daughter, which is the Malchus. Hanikar Eretz, V'ratz Lahamshach, V'chinas Hatal V'Shemen Delela. He figured to use tremendous lights of tal and shemen and oil, and that will be enough to power out the sparks. Like we find, when there's a strong sun on the earth, it's very hot. The heat draws out the wetness, the moisture of the earth. That's why in deserts it's so dry. The eid yalim in aretz, and the moisture comes out of the aretz from the sun. So too, Yitzchak figured if he's enough shine on him, a great light, all the sparks will come out. If you have a small candle in front of a big fire, it takes the small flames of the candles. If we're going to give a big light, with tremendous strength from Yitzchak, which is the blessings, the wording of the blessings, it's going to pull out all the sparks that fell down. And he says, and in order for this to work, it has to be mamish tremendous blessings, additions that overwhelm Esav. It has to come from beyond the chain of creation, because the chain of creation, Esav isn't just fixable like that so easily. So if he say the shalshus, not only that, based on the system of creation, Esav isn't worthy. It's like you're trying to say to someone, "How am I going to fix you?" You're not going to have to go through a process of change. We're going to give you all the. Maybe if we put you in the palace in the king's house, then automatically you're going to become a better person. But he wasn't worthy of those blessings. That's why when Yitzchak is talking to Esav, what does he tell him? I'm going to bless you lifnei Hashem. What's lifnei Hashem? not just before God, but before God, meaning higher than the level of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Like we know, we've learned this many times, that Yud Kei Vav Kei is the beginning of limitations of, say, the Shtalshlis. When it comes to times of Kapara, like we say on Yom Kippur, Lifnei Hashem Titaru, that only before Hashem you could get pure, because in the level of godliness, Yud Kei Vav Kei, there's rules, and Esav is not worthy of these blessings. Therefore, we have to go Lifnei Hashem Dafka. Varasin Shahaya Yitzchak. What did Yitzchak want? He didn't want, doesn't say why he didn't want Yaakov involved. Later, it seems, we're not going to get to the Mammor because I have to leave soon, but later it seems like what he's saying is that Yaakov, either to save Yaakov the toil, or because that's not what he wanted to do. Yaakov's Yaakov, but Esav is, he figured we could fix Esav directly. But why did he see it that way? He says because he saw Esav from the Makif side. And from the Makif side, from that 11th component, Esav had a tremendous energy that could still give life to Tuma. And he says, one second, if he has that source that's so great and keeps in existing the negative, why do we have to keep in existing the negative? Let's just change, let's overpower this source. And it will affect that what it's giving life to should no longer be swallowed up. Let's make the Makiv even stronger. Instead of the Makiv being, let's say, within its norm, and within its norm, it gives life even to negative. Let's make the source so powerful that not only does it give life to the negative, it changes the negative and it makes it into positive. So he says, Ach mikom makim ta'beza. This is Yitzchak's mistake. She'ein Esav kedai b'chinas zu kima de Yaakov. It doesn't work like that. Esav it doesn't work that Esav could get this power and it should be changed. The only way it's going to work is through Yaakov. Why? If it were given directly to Esav like Yitzchak wanted, one or two things would happen. Either that itself would get lost, right? You give more and you think that by giving more, the person will change, and instead the person just continues to abuse even more, right? You're going to try to, Ramesh, we're going through all these decisions right now, right? How are we going to deal with the situation? Maybe we're going to give him a pause, we're going to give him a ceasefire, obviously they're going to take advantage of it, right? So either Yibala, Chas V'Shalom, that whatever you give more itself isn't it just get lost, like before, or on the flip side, if it doesn't get lost, Esav explodes. Means Esav ceases to exist. Esav can't be the character of Esav, which is what it means to work on something through Yaakov. Yaakov takes Esav. The idea of the world is God doesn't want to overpower the world, that the world ceases to exist. That in our separation, we should find God. That a person sits there with their challenges and all the complications of life and find God there. But to all of a sudden open the light and you see that the whole world doesn't really exist, that's not changing the world. That's just changing the reality. So we want to keep the reality of Esav, and Esav as he is should change. That only happens through Yaakov. Because either Esav will take advantage of the light, or Esav will cease to exist. But there's no middle ground. There's nothing left of Esav as an entity, as an individual. But you want to transform Esav from darkness to light, and his bitterness to sweetness. That only happens to Yaakov. It has to come from the holiness within the system. What does it mean, Zerampin? It means like 7 days of creation, within the tools of creation, within the time and space of creation, we have to change the world, right? That's why we find challenges in our Vaida, in our service. If everything we tried worked, and say, why doesn't it work? It's a good idea, right? I'm helping God. Why isn't it working? Because that's just the way of coming above down. But if you want to change within, the challenges is part of what the transformation. Only through Yaakov Yispar me'Esav do we fix Esav Yichud b'kedusha. Now Esav himself could be able to be included in kedusha. And therefore he agrees to the blessing that he gave Yaakov. It means he understands that his intentions was wrong. It means the question is, why at the end does he say Gam Baruch Yeh, that he should be blessed? You wanted to give, if you really wanted to give Esav, and you knew who Esav was, according to the Alter Rebbe's explanation here, right? So why afterwards does he say Gam Baruch Yeh, the Yaakov should be blessed? Yaakov, that wasn't what he wanted. But he realized that what he wanted was wrong. And because he realized what he wanted was wrong, therefore he acknowledged that it has to go through Yaakov. And therefore, we'll just finish the next little piece. Therefore, it says, La'esav Amar, therefore, in the blessing that he gives Esav, he says, Hine mishmane haaretz, mishmane haaretz. He doesn't get the whole fat of the land, only from the fat of the land. Miktsas shmane. He can only get a little bit. Yaakov Amar umishmane b'taisis vav. He gets all the fat of the land. The hainu mitamtzis hanisher mishemen shenimshach al haaretz. Only a little bit could be part of Esav, because Esav, you have to be very careful how much you give him. And from the tal, which is Torah, goes from Yaakov into Esav also. It only comes in way of Makiv slowly, and in order for Esav to slowly change, he says, you have to serve Yaakov. If you acknowledge Yaakov and serve Yaakov, and you don't fight Yaakov, then you could change who you are. And that's the only way he gets his elevation. So he continues to go that he goes into the next question. What does it mean that he smells the sada of Gan Eden when he smells Esav? So he explains what that is, and he goes into the idea of, at the end of the day, he says, I just want to read one more part, a little bit on page 19. So basically, the explanation is of what Yitzchak wanted from Yaakov, from to give Esav. He says, "When you call zehu avonas apasuk l'fidaitoi," and so I'm just the middle page 19. When you call zehu avonas apasuk l'fidaitoi Yitzchak, this is the way Yitzchak thinks in his mind. Shehavin she'Esav hayilfan, when he thinks Esav is in front of him. He's asking another question. How is it if he smelled the clothing of Esav, he smelled the makif of Esav, he smelled the potential of Esav, but at the end it wasn't Esav standing there, and he smelled anyways a smell of Yaakov. And if you want to say, because the idea is that Yaakov would have got Torah anyways, Yaakov would have got the blessings anyways. Those blessings were given to from Hashem through Avram to Yitzchak to go to Yaakov. But there was something that what was this extra spice that he smelled in Yaakov if it wasn't Yaakov's avodah? Yaakov didn't have all these sparks that Esav had. So he says like this. It says in Medrash, what does it mean he smelled the smell of his clothing? By Godav b'chinas Baal Tshuva. And by Yaakov, the level of Yaakov also has the level of the Baal Tshuva. By Godav means a person who's fighting against Hashem. Shu b'chinas Makiv, that's also a Baal Tshuva, draws from Makiv. Means not just the unholiness of the world, but even a person, a Jew himself, when he has to go through the process of tshuva, the mashchin b'chayate, because they're connected much stronger, they're pulling much stronger down light because of where they were coming from. Like it says in the Zohar, Avram zaken ba b'yamim, that Avram was coming to age. Zaken inu mard tiyuft in the mashchin. Perish Lamaila Mikdesh Tuchel Nefesh says the Avram himself had a measurement of mount he brought down. But the Baal Tshuva, he says, if you look at the Targum, it says that Ashreichem Baal Tshuva, how great are the Baal Tshuva? And they willingly bring down in their heart much more than the heart than they can handle because of where they're coming from. They can't even take in the great light because they felt so far, they want to bring down more. Like the famous person, Rabbi Elazar ben Jerdai, who was a huge Baal Avera, and in one moment he cried himself to death from his tshuva. Avram had it all organized. And he says, where did Yaakov get the smell in his clothing of the Baal Tshuva? Because when you think about it, even as a Yid, even in your positive, how far you are from Hashem. Only God's ray is on creation, but he still gives his essence to the Jewish people, and all the connection and the process of creation. Even a person who doesn't do sin, by recognizing that in your existence you're far from Hashem. You're crying about the separation, and that creates a smell. Halosman, which is the female waters going up to Yitzchak, which is the Makiv Lahamshach B'chinas Makiv to give the blessing that Esav was given or he thought he's giving to Esav, and he's giving to Yaakov, they give him the power to transform Esav. Means that what happened over here is that Yaakov on himself could be straight, could be regular, but Yaakov also feels within himself the distance he has from Hashem, even while he's here to bring light down, even though he's not struggling with the struggles of Esav, he's not the tumah of Esav, and nevertheless, every part of creation is separate. That creates a tremendous passion that he has for Hashem, and with that passion, he's the tools that Yaakov uses to go and change the world and make it that he wants the whole world, not just his space, but the whole world, and Esav included, to become a space for Kedusha. All right, everyone. Sorry I have to go a little early, but I have to take my kids to the doctor. Laila Tov and Shabbat Tov.
Okay, thank you. Hatzlacha.